everyone, this is Mallory Flowers on behalf of Jennifer Shelton and Associates, and we are coming to you live from Washington, D.C., and welcome to our Webinar Wednesday series. We are hosting a full day of complimentary webinars every 30 minutes until 4:30 p.m. Eastern, and our speakers range from accountants to attorneys and other industry professionals. The full schedule is on our website underneath the webinar tab. In the interest of time, we do not take questions, and our speakers' contact info is posted on the last slide. So if you have any questions, please contact the speaker directly. The recordings are on our website under the Archived Webinar tab as well as on our YouTube channel. And this is just a quick blurb about us. Jennifer Shelton says we help both product and service companies with federal contracting. Our services range from market analysis reports to contract vehicles, including the GSA schedule. We can also help you with proposal writing and post-award contract administration. More information about our services can be found on our website. These are some upcoming classes in January, and you can find more information at these links or on our website. We now offer advertising in our weekly newsletter and in our 2019 Webinar Wednesday series. Please contact me for more information. All right, so we're going to go ahead and dig into today's presentation, which is Intro to the Federal Budget, and our speaker is Mark Snyderman. Mark, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Mallory, and thank you to Jennifer Shelton for hosting the event today. We're excited to talk about the federal budget, which is, sort of for government contractors out there, an interesting topic and one that, it's good to know sort of the basics of the budget. There's a whole lot more to it than what we're going to talk about today, but I'm going to give you sort of the high-level 101 class on the federal budget and how does it work. So if you go to the next slide, please. So the agenda today is first we'll start out talking about, what does the Constitution say, which obviously is our governing law, and how does it set up how the budget process is supposed to work. The fiscal law principles, which are important to sort of keep in the back of your mind as you understand, where the money's coming from, how is it flowing. We'll talk what the budget process is supposed to look like and the realities of what we actually see on an annual basis, what has created the deficit, and how does that affect the budget overall. And as always, I'm going to give you some practical tips that you can use in your day-to-day business. Next slide, please. So what did the Constitution say about the budget? Well, Congress, as you remember from political science, maybe civics 101 back in high school, Congress has what's called the power of the purse. What does the power of the purse mean? It means they have the power, they raise revenue, so they can levy taxes, they can borrow money, they can appropriate proceeds to federal agencies, so they actually make the appropriations to the federal agencies to spend money, and they can also establish restrictions and conditions on how those funds are used. Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution says no money can be drawn from the Treasury without an appropriation made by law. So this is the critical piece of the budget, right? So this is basically saying that money can't be pulled out of the Treasury and be allocated to a federal agency unless Congress says that it's okay to do so. They have to do so by an appropriation law. So next slide, please. So there's some basic fiscal law principles that are important to understand when you're looking at the budget and the budget process. So we have the basic concept that the power of the purse sits in Congress. Then we have what's called the purpose statute. And the purpose statute says that agencies shall apply appropriations only to the objects for which the appropriations were made. Pretty much imply, as the statement says, it implies exactly what it is, right? The purpose of the funds as written by Congress is the only purpose that those funds can be allocated and used for. There's another concept called the Anti-Deficiency Act. Now, I didn't give you the cites here because the Anti-Deficiency Act runs across multiple citations. If you have questions on that, certainly give me a call after the conference. But the Anti-Deficiency Act authorizes administrative and criminal sanctions for unlawful obligation and expenditure of appropriated funds. So essentially, if you use money for funds for purposes other than what they were originally stated for, you could be in violation of the Anti-Deficiency Act. So for a government contractor, very important, or for a grantee, you receive grant funds for a very particular purpose, for some project that you're supposed to do that's very delineated in the statement of work. You use the money for something completely different. That's an Anti-Deficiency Act violation and subject to administrative and criminal sanctions. Next slide, please. More basic fiscal limitations. Agencies can obligate and expend appropriations only for a proper purpose, just like we just said. The agency can obligate only within the time limits applicable. So we like to call this the color of money. So specifically, you might think about operations and maintenance funds. Those have one fiscal year only availability, which means you can't spend them in a following fiscal. They have to be appropriated and authorized and expended within the year in which they were authorized. We'll have a slide later on what the color of money is across the different types of money that's available, just for your reference. And an agency can't obligate more than the amount appropriated by Congress. So if Congress says in a appropriation, you have $5 million to spend on this particular project, they can't authorize, the agency can't then say, oh, we had extra money, we're going to put it to this project. They have to get appropriations properly and use those monies as appropriated. Next slide, please. So this is essentially what the fiscal law philosophy is, and it was in this case U.S. First McCallum in 1976. The established rule is that the expenditure of funds is proper only when authorized by Congress, not that public funds may be expended unless prohibited by Congress. So what it's saying is that essentially public funds have to be appropriated and authorized specifically. They can't do what's not written. So they don't have there's no authority for an agency to just spend money as it may see fit. The agency can only spend money as it's been authorized by Congress. So it's an explicit philosophy as opposed to an implicit one. Next slide, please. So you may have seen these long acronym numbers, and if you're a government contractor or a grantee, you've definitely seen these in your contract documentation. I thought I'd help demystify a little bit on accounting classifications. So you see these long codes, and most of us have no idea what they mean. So I thought maybe I would help you take a look at what an acronym and how does an acronym break down. So if you look at the first set of numbers is really the important numbers that we can identify easily, because the rest go down into sub-allocations, and those are base specific or agency specific. But the first thing you'll see is, so this is a DoD acronym, Department of Defense acronym. So you'll see, the acronym number AA, and then a service designator, which is 17. And 17, there's a chart that shows you exactly what that means, and I give you the link to go see where that chart is here on the bottom of the slide. 17 is the Navy. Then there's a 0, and that 0 means it's the last digit of the beginning fiscal year. So this was a FY 2000 designation, so it's a Navy FY 2000 appropriation. The appropriation code is 1506, which is a procurement for an aircraft. So, and then you get down into the subheadings, which are the actual program executive office doing that work. So I just thought it'd be good to see sort of the basic numbering system and how this works. And so this slide's here for your reference. Next slide, please. So as I said before, I'm going to give you the basics of the color of money. So type of funding dictates the years available, which years available means the money's been appropriated by Congress, and it must be spent within those years. Spent being it means obligated. There's very specific terms when you're using appropriations, and people get confused a lot on obligation versus spending. As long as the money has been obligated to a contract, it's essentially been spent, which means it's within the term of the color of money, right? So RDT&E, which is Research Development Test and Evaluation money, is 2-year money, and it's available on an incremental basis, so they can fund incrementally. They don't have to have all the money available at the time they issue the contract. Procurement money is 3-year money. It's 5-year money if you're talking about ship buying, because it's a long-term activity, and that's fully funded. So they have fully funded available in the budget for those ships that they're going to procure, or the aircraft. O&M money is what a lot of contractors work on a daily basis, and that is only 1-year money. So it must be used within the year that it's obligated. So that's why you always hear about the end of year spending rush in July and August to try to spend up all the money that's been appropriated if they haven't spent their money yet. So that's usually O&M money that they're trying to get committed. And then there's military personnel money, which is 1-year money, and military construction money, which is 5-year money. Next slide, please. So there's really 5 key steps in the budget process, and mind you, this is the process as it is supposed to work, and we'll talk a little bit about how it actually works. The President submits the budget request to Congress. The House and the Senate pass budget resolutions. The House and the Senate Appropriations Committees, which are about 12 of them, then meet to mark up those bills. They vote on the appropriations bills and they reconcile all the differences. That goes to the President. The President signs it all into law. Now that's the perfect world, and we'll see on the next slide. Next slide, please. We'll see what the cycle is in terms of timing. So in terms of timing, most of this stuff is supposed to be done before the fiscal year. The fiscal year for the government starts on October 1 of each year. So in September to January of the prior year, the President will transmit a budget to Congress. Congress then deliberates on that budget between January and is supposed to have everything done by October 1, including the presidential signature. If there is no signature on a budget, on allocation, on appropriations bills by September 30, we hit the point of, okay, what happens now, which is usually a shutdown or other options, which we'll talk about in a minute. The President then and the federal agencies execute on the budget for the next fiscal year, and at the same time, the same process is rolling on an annual basis. Now, let's look and say that since the budget process really began in '77, when it was formulated in the law, only in 1977, 1989, 1995, and 1997 have all appropriations been passed across every single federal agency required. That's not a very good track record. Next slide, please. So when the budget fails, which obviously you've just seen, it fails quite a bit, the process doesn't work. So if all the appropriations aren't signed, what happens? One option we've seen in the past are omnibus bills, where they'll roll multiple agencies' appropriations bills into one bill. The government can shut down, and we've seen that quite a bit. Most recently, we've seen it, and potentially this Friday we will see it again. Continuing resolutions, which is typically what the government has done when they can't pass an appropriations bill. They just essentially say, we can't pass a bill. We're going to fund it at the same level as the prior year. Since fiscal year 98, that's happened 5.5 times. There's been 5.5 CRs every single year. So 5.5 agencies having to get the same funding as the year before because they can't come up with an appropriate budget using the process that's set up. And since FY 2006, 3 times they've used continuing resolutions to stopgap an entire year of budgeting. So if you think about that, that's pretty incredible to say that we haven't budgeted for an entire year 3 times since 2006. And the chart that you see to the right just sort of gives you a visible look at when budgets have come through and when appropriations have come through, and what's going on with continuing resolutions. This runs through FY 2018. FY 2019 we're in currently, and while the DoD had a budget passed, an appropriations bill passed, we have multiple agencies which do not currently have a passed budget, and everything expires on Friday. Next slide, please. So the other piece of budgeting that we need to talk about is the deficit, because it has a definitive effect on how they're budgeting in the process. And if you've tracked the budget at all, and the deficit's currently at the highest point it's ever been. It's up around 21 trillion. And as a fraction of GDP, just something I thought would be interesting for an interesting slide to see. We're approaching World War II type numbers in terms of how much the national debt is as a fraction of our total GDP, and projected to continually increase up to into 2040 up to about 160%, which is pretty outrageous. Next slide. So when I say that the deficit affects us, it essentially has created new laws that affect the budget process in a huge manner. So the Budget Control Act of 2011 mandated $917 billion in cuts over 10 years. Essentially, this was the attempt to try to bring the budget and the federal budget back under control by creating sequesters, which were mandatory across the board cuts. starting in 2013 through 2021, that would equal about the difference between 1.2 trillion and the budget reduction proposed. So if the budget didn't propose reduction, there would be mandatory sequesters. If the budget proposed a reduction up to the total amount of 1.2 trillion, then there'd be no sequester for that year. So we currently have no sequester, but there looks like future OMB projections are showing sequestration again. And for those of you that were part of the sequestration process a couple of years back in 2013, you remember that it really affected DoD clients and civilian agency clients quite a bit, as they were unsure how much they would be cut, when the cuts would be implemented. Money was held for significant portions of the year. It really put clients under a lot of stress to try to figure out how they were going to get their work done, which then in turn really affected the contractors and really put the contracting community in quite a tizzy. Then there's the debt ceiling. The debt ceiling is a mandatory part of the Budget Control Act, which says the debt can't go over a certain amount. Of course, every year they change the debt ceiling and just keep increasing it. It's currently suspended by President Trump until March of 2019, and it kicks sequester down the road through 2019 as well, because the debt ceiling was suspended. So you can't have any sequestration until the next time they vote on the deficit ceiling. Next slide, please. So what do you really need to know about this? You have to pay attention to potential shutdowns, right? So when I said before that Friday is a big day, I'll read off the list of agencies that are affected as of this Friday, because there is no appropriations and the continuing resolution is going to run out. The Department of Transportation, Housing and Urban Development, State Department, Interior Department, Department of Agriculture, Treasury, Department of Commerce, Justice Department, and Homeland Security are all affected by a potential shutdown this Friday, which is being driven by a standoff in Congress and the administration over the funding for the wall, the immigration wall with Mexico. So this is, obviously we need to know as contractors, is there a shutdown coming? How does that affect us? The best thing to do is to talk with your contracting officers and your contracting officer representatives early and often to know how do they plan to deal with it. Are you going to be affected as a contractor? Are you allowed to work? Are you not allowed to work? And if you are allowed to work, remember that you can now not bill for as long as the shutdown goes on. So this is it is a significant planning effort for companies that are doing business with the government to ensure that you're going to be in a good position. The CR is the norm, right? If you look at the statistics, we just went through them. Continuing resolutions are the way the business has been done. Appropriations have not been effective. They've been highly ineffective in being Congress, in passing budgets on a consistent basis. So we need to look and say, the numbers that we see year to year are the numbers that our customers will have. Customers continue to hold money throughout the year. So make sure that when it comes time in the summertime that you have contract space available, and start your conversations early with customers to see, will they have funds available that they're going to need to appropriate? Because as we said, if they're O&M funds and they have 1 year money, they got to get them appropriated before the end of the fiscal year. And the help your is really just sort of help your clients, help yourself, right? Help your clients to understand where they are in the process. Most of them aren't informed by their agencies where things are at, and also help yourself know where you can play, and understanding sort of the total budget process will help you navigate this world a whole lot better. Next slide. And that's really all I had. I appreciate your time today. I hope that was a quick whirlwind tour of appropriations and budget process, and that you got a good flair for how it works. Feel free to contact me. My information's there. I'm at mark@snydermanlawgroup.com, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you for sharing your time with us today, and thank you for everyone who joined us. Like you said, if you have any questions, please reach out to him directly with the information you see on your screen. All right, that's it for us today. Thank you, everybody.